The topic of today's lesson is the battle for ratification. This refers to ratification of the newly written Constitution. Ratification was the process in which the people, through their state legislatures, would approve of the Constitution or deny it and send the authors back to try again. People who supported the Constitution called themselves Federalist, while people who were opposed called themselves Anti-Federalist. So our essential question for today is, how did Federalist and Anti-Federalist differ in their view of government? So the Constitution was written over a period of about 4 months, but after it was completed, it was not yet law of the land. It had to be ratified. It had to be approved by the people. The writers of the Constitution knew that unanimous approval of the Constitution would be hard to achieve. Therefore, they created a new process, which through a series of state special elections through the state legislatures, the Constitution could be ratified when it was approved by 9 out of the 13 states. So only 9 had to sign on for the Constitution to become the law of the land. The Federalists were the people who supported the ratification of the Constitution. They supported the strong central government that was set forth in the Constitution and believed that was the best way to secure the success of America. 3 of the most well-known Federalists are pictured here: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, who was, you'll remember, the father of the Constitution, and John Jay. Other Federalists include George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, many of the founding fathers that we're most familiar with. The reason why we remember these 3 guys is because they were the authors of the Federalist Papers. This was a series of 85 essays that were originally published in New York newspapers to convince the people of New York to support the Constitution. Though they were anonymously published under the name Publius, we now know that it was Hamilton, Madison, and Jay who wrote these essays. Throughout these essays, these men argued why the Constitution was necessary. They explained their intentions in writing the Constitution the way that they did, and therefore serve historians with a way to interpret the meaning of different parts of the Constitution. If you're familiar with the musical Hamilton, you will know that majority of these essays were written by Hamilton, 51 to be exact, but most of the well-known ones, the most popular ones, were written by Madison. Here's an example. This is Federalist Papers number 51. This is one of those that we're not sure who the author was. Because they were published all anonymously, we've been able to figure out through writing styles and techniques who most of the Federalist Papers are attributed to, but some of them were still not sure if it was Hamilton or Madison. Federalist Papers 51 says, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. However, we know it's not angels who are running the government. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, the people, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. This reflects what we've been talking about with separations of power and a limited government that is not able to become tyrannical and oppressive. The Federalists wanted to convince Americans that even with a strong federal government, you could still avoid tyranny. The Anti-Federalists were opposed to the ratification of the Constitution. They thought that it made the federal government far too powerful and supported states' rights, wanted to leave majority of the power in the hands of the states. These men were also well-known founding fathers, men who helped lead the revolution effort, such as Sam Adams and Patrick Henry. Some of the anti-federalist views was that they made the central government too strong, took too much power away from the states. They thought that the president had entirely too much power and would become king-like. And they thought that Congress was too small and could not accurately represent the people. They thought that the legislative branch should be the most important and powerful branch since it's directly elected by the people. And they thought that the system created by the Constitution would not accurately represent the interest of the people. So some of the principles of the Constitution are listed here. Some of them we have talked about in class, but feel free to look into those on your own. One thing that the Constitution was missing that many anti-federalists called out was a Bill of Rights. Many of the writers of the Constitution argued that the Bill of Rights was that rights were inherently guaranteed to the people in the way the Constitution was originally written. But many of the anti-federalists wanted those rights to be explicitly laid out. As we know, the Constitution was ratified. Many people supported it after there was a promise to add a Bill of Rights within the first session of Congress. Most of you are probably familiar with what the Bill of Rights is. It is the first 10 amendments to our Constitution, so they were all ratified at once. So immediately after publishing our Constitution, we amended it right off the bat. We made changes to the Constitution that have endured through the Bill of Rights. So the main reason this was added was to ensure ratification of the Constitution. But what the Bill of Rights does is protect the rights of the people. It lays out explicit rights that the people are guaranteed to, that the government cannot exploit. We have here a list of full text of the Bill of Rights. As you can see, not very long. They're pretty concise. And over here, it's laid out in more common terms. Some of these you're probably very familiar with. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, press, religion, assembly, and petition. The Second Amendment has been one that's been talked about a lot, the right to bear arms. So feel free to check out that list. There's also a source down here where you can read more about the full text of the Bill of Rights. Thomas Jefferson was one of our founding fathers who was not very involved with crafting the Constitution. However, he did make some important contributions through some of his previous writings. Thomas Jefferson had authored the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom. This guaranteed freedom of religion to everyone in Virginia. And this text became influential to both the First Amendment of the Constitution, which guarantees freedom of religion, and also separation of church and state, which is embedded within our Constitution as well. I like to tell this story because over here we see Thomas Jefferson's gravestone. On it, he lists 3 accomplishments: author of the Declaration of Independence, author of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia. Most of you probably know Thomas Jefferson as a future president, but he was more so proud of these three accomplishments than he was of the presidency. So this was a huge deal for him and extremely influential to our Constitution. Here is a full list of the 13 original states and the date that they ratified the Constitution. We also see how close the votes were over on this side, how many people voted for and how many voted against. You'll remember that the Constitution went into effect with the 9th state to ratify, which happens to be New Hampshire. However, if you look at the states not ratified yet, it includes both Virginia and New York, which were two of the most populous and the most powerful states. So even though the Constitution went into effect, it could not be truly effective until you have two of the most powerful states in that union. You can see that they followed later that summer. It did not take them long to ratify, but in both of those states, it was extremely close. North Carolina was one of the holdouts. We did not approve the the Constitution until 1789. North Carolina was definitely one of the rural anti-federalist strongholds. And Rhode Island had been opposed from the very beginning, and they held out until 1790.